Back to one of our top stories now. The Albanese government will reintroduce its $10 billion housing bill to Parliament next week, unchanged. And what that does is sets up a showdown with the Greens again. Joining us live now is the Greens Housing Spokesperson Max Chandler-Mather. Max, good to see you. Thanks for your time. So, yeah, unchanged from their side of things. Will you change your position?
Well, I think this just demonstrates the government are still refusing to negotiate or budge at all. I want to be very clear that what we've said to the government is that spending at most $500 million a year from 2024-25, which is the government's plan, and not doing anything for renters is not a housing plan, it's a disaster. Now, we initially asked for $5 billion a year for public and affordable housing, and a coordination of a national freeze and cap on rent increases. We since halved our offer to $2.5 billion a year for public and affordable housing, and we asked the Prime Minister to coordinate a two-year freeze on rent increases followed by caps on rent increases at National Cabinet. Now, we're willing to negotiate, but a negotiation takes two to tango, and the government's saying it's their way or the highway when their way is hundreds of thousands more people waiting for public and affordable housing and millions of renters facing financial stress. That's not a negotiation. And I think this demonstrates they're still just playing politics.
What? Okay, why not just take, because rental caps are just not going to work, and the states have to call for this as well, and none of them are. So why not take those off the table? Wouldn't that mean you'd get greater progress?
Well, that's not true. So we saw recently the Victorian government said they were considering the Greens' proposal for a two-year freeze on rent increases.
That's a consideration, though. I mean, that's unlikely to go ahead.
Well, I would say that refutes your assertion that it's not going to happen. The Victorian government, one of the biggest states in Australia, is actively considering it. The New South Wales government said they were looking at tackling excessive rent increases, and Queensland's currently reviewing their form of rent controls. Now, what the Prime Minister could do is to push the states and territories over the line, go to National Cabinet that is currently considering harmonising national renters' rights, and one national renters' rights are limiting rent increases, put money on the table and say, hey guys, we're all basically all Labor premiers, or the entire mainland. We need to work out a plan to tackle rents and take the leadership that the Prime Minister did take when he coordinated caps on energy prices.
So just to be clear, you're not changing your demands at all. You're not going to water them down one iota.
Oh no, we're willing to negotiate. I want to be very clear on that. So obviously,
so you might change them.
Yeah. Well, no, we said we want to negotiate. So what we've said to the government, I've said publicly, is obviously our position is a two-year freeze on rent increases and caps on rents after that.
But is that non-negotiable?
No, that is. I suppose what I'm saying is what we really need to do is make sure unlimited rent increases are made illegal. And on the $2.5 billion a year, I would note there's now a federal budget surplus of $20 billion. The ACT Labor Conference just passed a motion calling on the federal government to commit to the Greens' demand to spend $2.5 billion a year. The CFMEU just released a report that found under the Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund, the shortage of social and affordable housing will blow out over 750,000 homes. Labor are isolated on this. Any expert you speak to will say we need to do more on housing. And we're not asking for the world. We're asking for a small amount of the budget surplus, $2.5 billion, to go towards building public and affordable housing.
The Prime Minister is announcing all of this today in Brisbane, a not so subtle message.
It is, although what I would say to the Prime Minister, happy to extend this invitation. If he is in Brisbane, he's welcome to pop around my office and we can actually start negotiating properly. I think what the public expects out of this in a parliament where they don't have a majority in the Senate is a good faith negotiation. Now, what they're doing instead is bringing back the bill unchanged. And I think what that should say to the public is they're not taking the housing crisis seriously. When you've got single mums choosing between paying the rent or feeding their kids, and you've got a shortage now that's going to blow out over 750,000 social and affordable homes, and all the government are proposing to do is spend at most $500 million a year from next year and refusing to budge, well, I would say they're failing in their basic responsibility to represent the millions of Australians right now doing it tough.
Okay, a $2 billion social housing accelerator, though, just announced last month. Is that not good faith?
Oh, well, look, we're happy that we secured that, but it's a one-off payment. Now, reason we're pushing so hard, and I should say on that $2 billion, it's going out the door right now. So that's good. But why we're pushing so hard is this is our one chance to affect the legislation, this Housing Australia Future Fund, which the government has touted as their long-term housing plan. We would be abdicating our responsibility as the Greens in the Senate to just pass this long-term plan through, which we know will lock in failure. That's our one chance to affect the long-term housing plan of this country. So of course we're going to push for that.
If the government digs its heels in, and if you can't come to a compromise, how would you feel about the possibility of this leading to a double dissolution and therefore possibly an early election?
Look, I know the government's touted that. I think that is a pretty empty threat. What I would say, it would be remarkable if the government was suggesting they would rather force the country back to another early election because they'd rather not spend $2.5 billion a year on public or affordable housing or do something for the 1/3 of this country who rents. Like, imagine going to the Joe Biden public and saying, oh, you're going to an election because we didn't want to spend a few extra $1 billion on public housing. I think they know that would be disastrous for them. We also know that 60% of the country now supports a freeze on rent increases. So look, if they want to do that, then sure. But I think what we'd all rather is for them to come to the table and start budging rather than bringing back a bill unchanged in the context of a parliament where they do not have an outright majority in the Senate, and they should be negotiating like any responsible government should.
We're out of time. Max Chandler-Mather, appreciate you joining us. We'll talk to you soon.